Usually, when we think about a massive shift in human history, like a transition from one era to another, or the dawn of a whole new spiritual age, we expect it to happen on a grand stage.
Right, yeah. We inherently expect the scenery to match the gravity of the event.
Exactly. We picture emperors signing treaties or armies clashing, or maybe some great prophet standing on a mountaintop declaring a new epoch to the masses.
We want thunder. We want lightning, the whole cinematic production.
We really do.
Hmm.
But then you step into the world of ancient biblical history, and suddenly that grand stage just vanishes. We aren't looking at a battlefield. We aren't in a Roman throne room. We are looking at a small-town wedding in the 1st century.
And the triggering event isn't a war. It's a catering disaster.
Right, a catering disaster. So welcome to the Deep Dive. We are thrilled you are joining us today. Whether you are a lifelong theology student, someone brushing up on history, or just insanely curious about ancient cultures, you are in the exact right place. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the archaeological, cultural, and theological layers of a very famous event. We're looking at the wedding at Cana, found in the Gospel of John, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12.
It's the moment Jesus turns water into wine.
Right. And our mission today isn't just a recap of familiar Sunday school story. We're going to examine the hidden layers beneath the text to discover how this specific, highly localized crisis illustrates a massive historical shift.
A shift from the rigid, heavy rules of ancient religious law to the unearned, boundless grace we actually experience today.
Okay, let's unpack this. How does the 1st century wedding disaster explain the entire architecture of modern grace?
Well, it is arguably one of the most recognizable narratives in biblical literature, but I think the sheer familiarity of it often blinds people to the profound theological mechanics that are operating just beneath the surface.
We get so used to the story that we stop looking at the details.
Exactly. So to really grasp what is happening here, we have to start by completely grounding this event in its actual physical history. Before we can even touch the spiritual meaning, we need to set the scene.
Okay, let's set it. When are we?
Historically, we can place this event very specifically in the timeline. We are looking at the late summer or early autumn of AD 29.
So we have an exact season and year. And the narrative opens in John chapter 2, verse 1 by saying, "And the 3rd day there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee." Let's stop right there.
Yeah, that's a crucial detail.
Why point out that it's the 3rd day? I mean, that feels like a very specific chronological marker for the author to drop in right at the start.
Oh, it is a brilliant, deliberate chronological marker. If you look at the sequence of events in the previous John chapter 1, you find this day-by-day diary of Jesus' first week of public ministry.
Right, he's down by the Jordan River.
Exactly. He is being identified by John the Baptist. He is calling his first disciples. And when the text says the 3rd day in chapter 2, verse 1, it refers to the time that has passed since Jesus spoke with his new disciple, Nathanael.
Oh,
So if you count the days listed sequentially in chapter 1, this 3rd day actually lands perfectly on the 7th day of that opening week of ministry.
so it's not just a random Tuesday in Galilee. It's the 7th day. And, knowing ancient Jewish literature, landing on the 7th day is never an accident.
Never. It echoes the Genesis creation week.
Wow.
The author is signaling to you, the reader, that Jesus is stepping onto the stage of human history to bring about a new spiritual creation. Just as God rested and celebrated his physical creation on the 7th day in Genesis, Jesus is beginning his ministry by celebrating on the 7th day in Cana of Galilee.
So the physical setting points directly to a spiritual reality right from the first sentence.
It does, which brings up a really fascinating geographical reality, too.
Oh, right. The location of Cana. Because if you travel to the region today, the tour buses will likely drop you off at a modern town called Cana.
Yes, the tourist hub.
Yeah, there are churches there, souvenir shops, the whole pilgrim infrastructure. But the archaeological data points somewhere else entirely, doesn't it?
It really does. We have to strongly contrast that modern tourist site with an archaeologically supported ruin called Cana.
Cana.
Right. You see, during the Byzantine era, pilgrims needed convenient stops along the major trade routes, so traditions often sprang up in easily accessible towns. Cana fit that bill perfectly.
It was convenient for the tour buses of the ancient world.
Exactly. But Cana is the authentic site. It is located about 8 or 9 miles north of Jesus' hometown of Nazareth. It sits on a highly defensible, steep hill overlooking the Bet Natufa Valley.
So it's not a bustling metropolis, it's a rural, agricultural, tight-knit village.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And what makes Cana so compelling from an archaeological standpoint is that recent excavations there have uncovered a network of first-century underground worship caves.
Worship caves. Wait,
Right.
really?
Yes. And within those caves, archaeologists found Christian veneration dating back centuries, and specifically, they found an in situ stone altar designed to hold exactly 6 large stone jars.
Oh, wow. That is incredibly specific.
It is. It implies that very early Christians recognized this rural, off-the-beaten-path village as the actual authentic site of the miracle.
So we are in this tight-knit village, perched on a hill above a valley, and a massive celebration is underway. The text mentions that Mary, the mother of Jesus, is already there.
Right. She's likely helping with the hosting duties.
Yeah, and Jesus is called to the marriage along with his newly chosen disciples. We're talking about Andrew, Peter, Philip, and Nathaniel.
And it is worth noting how the Gospel of John specifically names these individuals here, which supplements the accounts we find in the Synoptic Gospels. They travel from the lower Jordan region up into this Galilean hill country, specifically to attend the feast.
And just by showing up, Jesus is making a pretty significant cultural statement, isn't he?
Oh, massive.
Because, I mean, you had religious sects back then, like the Essene monks at Qumran, who lived in strict, isolated asceticism out in the desert. They believed holiness meant avoiding parties, avoiding wine, avoiding normal society altogether.
Yes, the Essenes were very strict.
But Jesus walks right into the middle of a wedding.
He does, and that contrast is totally intentional. In the ancient Mediterranean world, a wedding was arguably the happiest week of a person's entire life.
A whole week.
A full 7 days, yes. It was a massive community festival filled with feasting, music, and joy. By attending, Jesus is actively validating normal human joy, marriage, and community fellowship.
He's right in the mix of everyday life.
Exactly. He is not a harsh ascetic hermit hiding from the public in a desert cave. He hallows the everyday, mundane joys of human life just by being present.
But then, right in the middle of this week-long festival, the crisis hits. The text says in verse 3, "And when they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus saith unto him, They have no wine."
Such a simple statement.
Right? But we need to clarify the language here, because wanted wine in older English translations doesn't mean they were just in the mood for a drink and couldn't find a waiter.
Correct. In the older English usage, wanted means they lacked it entirely. They ran out, the supply was completely, utterly exhausted.
Now, I have to push back a little here, or at least play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
I get that running out of drinks at a wedding today is a bummer. People might grumble, maybe the groomsmen have to make a quick run to the store, or folks might just leave a little early.
Right, it's an inconvenience.
But when you study the historical context, exegetes treat this as a massive social disaster that could literally ruin the family. Was it really that serious, or is that just ancient melodrama?
No, it is not melodrama in the slightest. We have to view this through the lens of the ancient Mediterranean honor and shame culture.
Honor and shame.
Yes, in that society, your honor, your family's reputation, was your most valuable currency. It dictated your standing in the community, your business prospects, everything.
So it's not just about what people think of you, it's your actual livelihood.
Exactly. To invite guests to a week-long celebration and fail to provide the expected hospitality was a profound, devastating humiliation. It implied that the groom's family was poor, deeply disrespectful, or just completely incapable of basic planning.
So the whole village would remember this failure. It would be the defining story of this family for generations.
It would be a lasting disgrace. But it goes beyond just social gossip, too. Legally, it was incredibly serious.
Wait, legally?
Yes. Historical records show that failing to provide proper provisions at a wedding could actually trigger financial lawsuits from the bride's insulted relatives.
You could get sued for running out of wine.
You could. The groom had a legal and social obligation to host properly. So this isn't just a party foul. This is an impending social, communal, and financial catastrophe for this new family.
Wow. And from a theological perspective, this physical crisis represents something much bigger in the biblical narrative, doesn't it?
It does. Spiritually, we have to view this completely empty wine supply as a direct metaphor for the spiritual bankruptcy of the nation of Israel at that exact moment in history. Throughout biblical literature, wine is frequently used as a symbol of joy, abundance, and the coming messianic age. So, a Jewish wedding, completely running out of wine, perfectly pictures the dry, empty, joyless state of Israel's religious system under the Pharisees.
Religion had just become a bunch of rules,
Exactly. The old system had simply run dry. It had nothing left to offer the people.
which sets the stage perfectly for what happens next. Mary, seeing this massive social bomb about to detonate, brings the problem straight to Jesus.
She knows he can do something.
Right. And his response, well, it is one of the most misunderstood interactions in all biblical history. She tells him they have no wine, and in John chapter 2, verse 4, Jesus says, "Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come."
It's a famous verse.
I have to admit, to modern ears, that sounds incredibly rude. It sounds like a teenager snapping at his mother.
It absolutely sounds harsh to us today, but we have to translate the culture, not just the literal words. In the original Greek, the word translated as woman is ginai.
Cana.
Yes. And this was actually a highly respectful, polite term of endearment. It is much closer to how someone in the American South might say, ma'am, or how we might address a queen as madam.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's absolutely no disrespect or condescension in the title itself. Jesus addresses his mother with profound respect.
Okay, well, that softens the blow of the first word. But what about the rest of the phrase? What have I to do with thee? Even if you say it politely, it still sounds like a complete brush-off.
That phrase is a literal word-for-word Greek translation of an ancient Hebrew idiom. And as we know, idioms rarely translate cleanly across cultures or languages.
Like saying it's raining cats and dogs.
Exactly. If you translate that literally into another language, they think animals are falling from the sky. What that Hebrew idiom actually means is, your concern is not my concern, or what do we have in common in this specific matter? Jesus is gently but firmly establishing a boundary.
A boundary between his role as her son and his role as the prophesied Messiah.
Precisely. This touches on a profound theological concept known as the hypostatic union, and specifically the doctrine of kenosis.
Kenosis, what does that mean?
Kenosis refers to the reality that when the Son of God became a man, he willingly emptied himself of his independent exercise of divine rights. He perfectly submitted himself to God the Father.
So he's not just acting on his own whims.
Right. In this moment, he is telling Mary that his mission, his timeline, and his miracles are dictated strictly by the Father's schedule in heaven, not by human family emergencies on earth.
That completely flips my understanding of this. I always thought he was just saying, "Not right now, Mom, I'm busy."
That's a common misconception.
But he's actually saying, "I do not take my marching orders from earthly relationships, not even from my own mother. I only do what the Father tells me to do."
That is exactly it. And when he adds the phrase, "Mine hour is not yet come," he is pointing to something incredibly solemn.
His hour.
Yes, throughout the Gospel of John, Jesus' hour almost always foreshadows his ultimate mission, his death on the cross. He is acutely aware that stepping out publicly, starting his public miracles, will set in motion the political and religious dominoes that will ultimately lead to his execution.
Wow. So he's standing in the middle of a joyous wedding celebration, looking at empty wine cups. But in his mind, he is looking straight at the cross.
Yes.
He knows that fixing this temporal, earthly problem is the first step toward his own death. That adds a staggering amount of weight to the moment.
It really does. And this specific interaction between Jesus and Mary is actually the center of a massive theological debate. How different Christian traditions interpret this boundary changes their entire theological framework.
Right. Because if we look at the Catholic and Orthodox traditions, they often view Mary in this scene as the new Eve, don't they?
Yes, that is a very prominent historical interpretation. The argument is that in the Garden of Eden, the first woman, Eve, prompted the first man, Adam, to rebel against God, which brought a curse on the world.
Okay.
So here at Cana, Mary, acting as the new Eve, prompts the new Adam, Jesus, to bring a miraculous blessing. In these traditions, her successful advocacy here at the wedding is used to support the idea of Mary as a mediatrix in heaven today.
Meaning she mediates for us.
Right. The logic is that just as she interceded for the family at the wedding, believers can pray to her today so she can bring their needs to Jesus and he won't refuse his mother.
But Protestant exegetes argue the exact opposite based on the very same text.
They do. Protestant scholars look at this exact same interaction and argue that the boundary Jesus sets, "Woman, what have I to do with thee?" is deliberate, recorded proof that earthly family ties grant absolutely no special access to divine power.
The complete denial of that special access.
Exactly. They argue that Jesus gently rebuked her to demonstrate definitively that he alone is the one mediator between God and man, and that his divine power cannot be manipulated or accelerated by natural human relationships.
It is fascinating how the exact same verse acts as a foundational pillar for two completely different worldviews.
It really is.
But, regardless of which theological camp you fall into, you had to admire Mary's reaction the very next moment. Because she doesn't argue. She doesn't pull rank as his mother.
Yeah.
She doesn't get defensive or try to manipulate the situation.
She shows incredible humility.
She really does. In verse 5, she simply turns to the servants and says, "Whatsoever he saith unto you, do it." And those are her final recorded words in the entire New Testament.
It is a profound final statement. She completely accepts the boundary he just established, but she doesn't withdraw in defeat or bitterness. She steps aside in total active faith.
She just yields.
Yes. She drops her own timeline, she abandons whatever plans she had to fix the crisis, and she points the servants directly and only to him.
It reminds me of a business analogy. It's like a manager who has been frantically trying to run a struggling company. They're pulling all the levers, trying to stop the bleeding, and finally they just hand the keys over to a turnaround expert.
That's a great way to picture it.
They step back, look at the employees, and say, "Whatever this person says, do it. I completely relinquish control." She models this perfect active faith. She doesn't tell Jesus how to fix it. She just trusts that he will.
And that relinquishing of control is the pivot point of the narrative. Because she steps back, Jesus steps forward, and that leads us to the physical props he uses for this miracle.
The props are so specific here.
Very specific. The text zeroes in on what is sitting in the courtyard in verse 6. And there were set there 6 waterpots of stone, after the manner of the purifying of the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece.
Okay, let's look at the sheer scale of this because it's staggering. A firkin is an old English measurement used in translation. But in modern terms, 2 or 3 firkins equals roughly 20 to 30 gallons per pot.
That's per pot.
Right, and there are 6 of these massive pots.
So we are talking about a total capacity of anywhere from 120 to 180 gallons of liquid. That is an enormous volume.
It's basically a commercial-scale beverage operation just sitting in the courtyard. But the text is very specific about what these pots are made of and what they are used for. It explicitly says they are made of stone and they are for the purifying of the Jews.
Yes.
Why point out that they are stone? What's wrong with regular clay pots? I mean, clay was everywhere back then.
This is a fantastic historical and cultural detail that really reveals the depth of the narrative. Under the strict rules of the Jewish religious law, the Mosaic Law, and specifically the traditions of the elders that had built up around it, if an earthenware clay pot came into contact with something ceremonially unclean, it absorbed that impurity.
Because clay is porous.
Exactly. The impurity was believed to seep into the material itself, and according to Leviticus, that clay pot had to be shattered. It couldn't be cleaned.
Wow, you just had to destroy it.
Right. But chalkstone was deemed safe. It was considered impervious. It did not absorb ritual impurity. So for the endless, repetitive hand washing and vessel washing required by the religious traditions of the day, heavy stone pots were required.
And this isn't just an architectural or cultural detail. It's a deeply symbolic one.
Deeply symbolic. First, consider the numerology. There are exactly 6 pots. In biblical numbering, 6 is the number of mankind. It represents human effort, and it always falls short of 7, which is the number of divine perfection and completion.
So right away, the number indicates something incomplete, something lacking.
Yes. And second, these pots represent the heavy, cold, outward requirements of the Mosaic Law.
Let me make sure I'm tracking with this. It is like being handed a 500-page employee compliance manual on your first day of work.
Okay, I like where this is going.
You can memorize it, you can carry it around, you can use it to point out when your coworkers mess up, but reading a compliance manual will never make you actually love your job.
Not all.
The law, represented by these stone pots, could point out your dirt. You could prescribe endless washings, but it couldn't create joy.
That is a perfect analogy. The law is a diagnostic tool. It shows you the dirt, but it cannot change the human heart. It was heavy, like stone, and it could only hold plain water for external washing. It had no internal joy, no life-giving properties. It was a system of behavioral modification, not internal transformation.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. If these pots represent the heavy, impossible rules of ancient religion, why does Jesus choose these exact pots to perform his first miracle?
That is the million-dollar question.
I mean, he's the creator of the universe. He could just materialize wine out of thin air. He could have filled up the empty wineskins that were already sitting in the banquet hall. Why intentionally use the purification pots?
What's fascinating here is that Jesus is making a deliberate, highly visual theological statement. He is demonstrating that he is about to fulfill the old system and transform it into something vastly superior.
Fulfill it, not destroy it.
Exactly. Notice he doesn't ignore the law. He doesn't smash the stone pots and say, we don't need these anymore. He takes the very vessels of Jewish legalism, fills them to the absolute limit, and changes them from the inside out.
That is beautiful.
He takes the plain water of external ritual purification and miraculously turns it into the rich wine of joyful internal celebration.
So he's upgrading the entire system. And the way he does it is incredibly subtle. He doesn't make a grand speech. In verses 7 and 8, Jesus issues his first command to the servants. He says, fill the water pots with water. And the text notes, and they filled them up to the brim. I love that detail, to the brim.
It is a crucial apologetic detail. By having the servants fill the massive pots completely to the top edge, there is absolutely no empty space left.
Right, which directly counters a lot of skeptical arguments. Because throughout history, secular scholars have tried to write this event off as a copied pagan myth, or just a clever parlor trick.
Yes, the magic trick theory.
They point out that in the ancient Greek temple of Apollo, the pagan priests had this trick, where they hid a stone pipe inside an altar. They poured water on one end, it mixed with hidden wine, and wine came out the other end to trick the worshippers into thinking a miracle happened.
Right. But the specific historical detail of filling them to the brim eliminates that possibility entirely. If the pot is full to the absolute brim with water, you can't sneak in a secret bladder of wine.
There's no room.
Exactly. You can't secretly mix in a colored syrup to fool the guests. The pots are full of pure water. Furthermore, notice what Jesus doesn't do.
What doesn't he do?
He doesn't speak an incantation over the pots. He doesn't stir the water. He doesn't even physically touch them. The transformation happens silently, instantly, by the sheer will of the Creator.
Wow. And then he tells the servants to do something absolutely terrifying.
Oh, it really is.
He says, draw out now and bear unto the governor of the feast. Now, the governor is the architriclinos,
Yes, the master of ceremonies.
basically the head waiter or coordinator who is responsible for the quality of the food and drink. So picture these servants who just broke their backs pouring 180 gallons of plain water into stone washing pots, are now being told to dip a cup into that washing water and hand it to the boss, who is expecting premium wine.
The anxiety they must have felt.
The level of faith that requires is incredible.
It is a tremendous act of obedience. They had to walk those cups across the courtyard believing that what they drew out was no longer water. And the sociological contrast that the author sets up here is just brilliant.
Contrast between who?
Between the architriclinos and the servants, you have the proud, important ruler of the feast. He tastes the new wine, and verse 9 explicitly says he knew not whence it was. He has absolutely no idea where this miraculous provision came from.
He's totally in the dark.
Completely. But the lowly, humble servants who drew the water, the text says they knew.
It's an entirely upside-down power dynamic. The guy in charge is clueless, and the blue-collar workers had the ultimate insider knowledge.
It perfectly pictures the spiritual reality of Israel at that time. The proud religious leaders, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, they were completely blind to who Jesus was.
They couldn't see it.
Right. They tasted the blessings of God, they saw the miracles, but they couldn't recognize the Messiah standing right in front of them. Meanwhile, God reveals his deep secrets and his awesome power to the humble, lowly servants who simply obey his word.
Okay, now we need to address a major debate that constantly pops up when discussing this text.
I think I know where you're going with this.
It's the polemic of alcoholic wine versus grape juice. Because there are modern groups who argue adamantly that Jesus must have created unfermented, pasteurized grape juice.
Yes, the two wine theory.
Their logic is that creating actual alcohol would encourage drunkenness, which the biblical texts obviously condemn. So was it really booze?
It is a very common debate, especially in modern Western contexts, but the linguistic and cultural evidence is overwhelming. It was real wine. The Greek word used here is oinos, which was the standard universal word for fermented wine.
Oinos.
Yes. Furthermore, look at the logic of what the governor of the feast says when he tastes it. He calls the groom over and says, "Every man at the beginning doth set forth good wine, and when men have well drunk, then that which is worse."
Right.
That phrase, well drunk, translates the Greek word methisko, which literally means freely consumed to the point of dulling the senses.
You don't dull your senses on Welch's grape juice.
No, you don't.
The governor's whole cultural proverb that you serve the expensive stuff first and then bring out the cheap stuff after people can't taste the difference relies entirely on the intoxicating effect of the drink.
Exactly. The logic of the passage collapses if it's grape juice. Now, we do need to provide proper historical context, to be fair.
Sure.
In the ancient Mediterranean world, drinking water was often unsafe, it carried diseases, wine was used to purify the water, and the drink served at meals was typically heavily watered down, often 3 or 4 parts water to 1 part wine.
So it wasn't like drinking straight vodka.
No, it was much weaker than modern distilled alcoholic beverages, but it was definitely real fermented wine. And we have to remember the text does not endorse drunkenness. In fact, Paul consistently condemns it later in his epistles.
Right.
But this miracle highlights God's lavish, joyful abundance. The Old Testament prophets foretold that the coming messianic age would be marked by mountains dripping with sweet wine, a time of unprecedented agricultural and spiritual abundance. Jesus is actively fulfilling that prophetic imagery here.
And he doesn't just fulfill it, he perfects it. The governor is shocked because, as he says to the groom, "Thou hast kept the good wine until now." That statement is a total reversal of the natural human condition.
If we connect this to the broader theological narrative of Scripture, it is a profound pattern. Think about it. The natural human way is to give your very best first.
Yeah. We always lead with our best.
We put our best foot forward, we make a great first impression, but eventually human effort degrades. It fades, it gets tired, and it gets worse over time.
That is so true.
But God's pattern is the exact opposite. He takes what is fading, what is empty, and he replaces it with something eternal. He saves the absolute best for last.
Wow.
While the old system of the law of Moses came first and was good and holy for its designated time, the new life of grace that Jesus ultimately brings is vastly superior. It brings a lasting internal joy that the external law never could.
Which brings us to the ultimate so what of this entire deep dive. The wedding ends, the crisis is averted, the family's honor is saved, and the disciples' faith is solidified.
It's a happy ending all around.
It is. The text tells us in verse 12 that Jesus heads down to Capernaum with his disciples, his mother, and his half-brothers for a few days. But why did the author of John record this specific event as the first sign? What is the overarching theological payload here?
The key is in verse 11, where it says, "This event manifested forth his glory." In the Gospel of John, miracles are not just random acts of kindness. They are explicitly called signs.
Signs pointing to something else.
Exactly. A sign is a marker that points to a reality much bigger than itself. When you see a sign for Chicago on the highway, the sign isn't Chicago. It points to Chicago.
Right.
This wasn't just a parlor trick to keep a local party going. Jesus was validating his true identity to the nation of Israel. He was showing them, through highly symbolic prophetic imagery, that he was the true bridegroom of Israel.
The true bridegroom.
Yes, he was the prophesied Messiah who had the power to reverse the curse, to end the dryness of their religion, and to offer the literal earthly kingdom of abundance and joy that all the prophets had promised.
Okay, but let's look at this through the specific theological framework we mentioned at the start of the deep dive. We talked about how this explains the architecture of modern grace. How does a dispensational framework interpret this sign in the grand timeline of biblical history?
This is where the synthesis of biblical theology really shines. A mid-acts dispensational framework takes a step back to view the entire biblical timeline, paying incredibly close attention to who's being addressed at any given time and what rules apply to that specific era.
So context is everything.
Everything. During this event at Cana, we have to recognize that Jesus is operating strictly under the law of Moses. As Paul later writes in Romans chapter 15, verse 8, Jesus Christ was a minister of the circumcision.
He was ministering to Israel.
He was sent specifically to the lost sheep of the house of Israel to confirm and fulfill the promises made to the Jewish fathers.
So the 6 stone water pots, the Jewish purification rituals, the prophetic imagery of the wine, this is all highly specific to the nation of Israel and their covenant relationship with God. He is offering them the earthly kingdom promises.
Exactly. Jesus was offering Israel that literal, physical, visible kingdom of heaven on earth. If they repented and accepted him as their king, the times of refreshing would come.
But they didn't, did they?
No, they didn't. As we read through the rest of the historical gospel accounts and into the early chapters of the book of Acts, we see a tragic reality unfold. The religious leaders and ultimately the nation of Israel as a whole rejected their king.
They crucified him.
They stumbled at the cross, and they continued to reject the witness of the Holy Spirit through the 12 apostles in the early chapters of Acts. Consequently, because of that national rejection, God temporarily paused that prophetic earthly kingdom program.
He pressed pause in the prophetic timeline. It didn't fail. It was just suspended.
Yes, the prophetic clock stopped, and then God did something entirely unprophesied, something that wasn't in the Old Testament at all.
A mystery.
Yes, he revealed a mystery that had been kept secret since the world began. He revealed this secret to a new apostle, the Apostle Paul. And that secret is the dispensation of the grace of God.
The age we live in now.
Precisely. God began forming a brand new heavenly agency called the body of Christ, where the distinction between Jews and Gentiles is completely abolished and all are made equal through the blood of the cross.
That completely clarifies the timeline. But it raises a really practical question for you, the listener. If we aren't ancient Israelites waiting for a physical, earthly kingdom, and we aren't relying on stone purification pots to make ourselves clean, why do we care about the water turning into wine? What is the practical application of this text for someone driving to work today?
We care because it provides a breathtaking contrast that highlights the sheer beauty and relief of the grace we live under today. Today, as members of the body of Christ, we do not live under the rigid, heavy, empty stone pots of the Mosaic Law.
We don't have to carry that weight?
No. We are not required to perform endless external rituals, baptisms, or washings to make ourselves acceptable to God. We don't need to seek out physical signs and wonders to prove that God loves us or that He is active in our lives.
We don't need to exhaust ourselves trying to fill the pots to the brim with our own good works.
Exactly. The law demands that you fill the pot yourself. Grace says the pot is already full and it's already been transformed.
That's incredible.
Just as Jesus took plain, ordinary water and instantly, miraculously transformed it into the best wine without any human effort, God takes our ordinary, sinful, spiritually dead lives and transforms them through unmerited, pure grace.
He does all the work.
He doesn't just patch up our old, dead religious efforts. He makes us entirely new creatures. We rest entirely in the finished work of the cross, the very hour Jesus was looking toward when he spoke to his mother at that wedding.
So we are on the other side of that hour.
Yes. In this present dispensation of grace, we drink deeply from the joy of God's unmerited favor, totally apart from the heavy, exhausting works of the law.
That is an incredible journey. We started with what looked like an impending social disaster at a rural village wedding, a family about to be ruined, a mother pleading for help, empty cups scattered all across the courtyard.
A total mess.
Yeah. And through careful exegesis of the historical, cultural, and linguistic layers, we watched that local disaster become a profound prophetic picture. A picture of the transition from the heavy, exhausting religious law of ancient times to the boundless, flowing grace we possess today.
It perfectly illustrates that God's ways are truly not our ways. He takes the very instruments of our inadequacy, those heavy, empty stone pots that constantly reminded Israel of their inability to be clean, and he uses them as the very vessels to display his overwhelming, joyful abundance.
And that means that, as a believer today, you, the listener, are living in the best wine era. You aren't living in the era of the empty stone pots.
Not at all.
You are living in an era defined by internal joy, the indwelling Holy Spirit, and unearned grace, rather than exhausting external religious performance. You don't have to worry about saving the best for last because the absolute best has already been poured out for you at the cross.
It is a theological position of absolute rest and assurance. There is nothing left to fill, nothing left to wash, and nothing left to prove.
So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. If the divine pattern we saw today is true, if God's fundamental nature is to save the best for last, and to effortlessly transform rigid, heavy rules into flowing, abundant joy, what heavy, empty stone water pots of religious performance are you stubbornly holding on to in your own life today, waiting for a transformation that you already have full access to by grace?
That is the question we all need to ask ourselves.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the text. Keep questioning, keep reading the word rightly divided, and keep diving deep.